The rain hit the pavement like bullets of sorrow. Through the storm, a billionaire stood in silence, wrists bound in cold steel, suit soaked and clinging to his frame. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But his gaze didn't flinch, locked on the child watching him from across the crowd. Her eyes wide. Her face ghostly still. He didn't blink. The child trembled, clutching a torn teddy bear, rain mixing with the tears on her cheeks. The world roared, but between them, only silence. Somewhere above, in the glass tower he once ruled, his face smiled on the cover of Time, plastered across a billboard. But here on the street he was just a man, broken, bare, and unguarded. A whisper cut through the static of the moment. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. No names. No reasons. Just a moment between two lives, cracking under truths the world had yet to hear. The child's name was Zara, though no one called her that anymore. Not since her world collapsed. She had watched her house disappear, her mother wither, and her toys vanish one by one at the pawn shop. The teddy bear was the last thing left, its seams holding memories her heart couldn't speak aloud. She hadn't meant to see the man in handcuffs. She just followed the sirens, drawn like a whisper to fire. And there he was. The man from the magazines. From the television. From the side of buses. She didn't know his name either. But something inside her cracked when she saw his eyes. Like he wasn't a stranger at all. As the crowd screamed and the police pushed, Zara didn't move. She just stared. And in that moment, he stared back. A silence deeper than noise stretched between them. Two lives, shattered and soaked, recognizing something no one else could see. His name was Omar Rahman, billionaire investor, tech mogul, and one-time savior of countless startups. But tonight, there were no boardrooms, no suits, no servants. Only the suffocating weight of chains and a city's judgment. They said he betrayed the world. Embezzled. Lied. Hid things. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But none of that mattered now. Because when he looked at that little girl, standing alone in the storm, he saw something truer than profit margins or scandal headlines. He saw himself. Long ago. A barefoot boy watching his father fall. A memory sharpened by time. A life built on escape. And now, maybe, unraveling. For all his brilliance, he couldn't understand why that girl felt like the ending. Or the beginning. Flashbulbs continued to burst, but they didn't blind him anymore. The image they would publish tomorrow would be iconic. Omar Rahman, king of the skyline, reduced to rain and silence. Yet beneath the headlines, something more profound unfolded. The cameras didn't capture the trembling in his fingers when he saw her, nor the echo of her expression, one he'd worn himself decades ago. People chanted around him. Some booed. Others cried. But Omar kept his eyes fixed forward. Because in that girl's presence, he wasn't a monster. He wasn't a martyr. He was just a man facing the truth that everything he built meant nothing if he couldn't protect what truly mattered. And he didn't even know her name. Somewhere in the chaos, a reporter's voice crackled into a microphone. Billionaire Omar Rahman arrested. Sources say he may face life in prison. Another added, insider trading, corruption, betrayal at the highest levels. Zara didn't hear them. Not really. Her eyes didn't move. Her feet didn't budge. Around her the world surged forward, indifferent and loud. But the moment, the stillness, held. Omar was led into the van. The doors closed. Their gaze finally broke. And yet, somehow, it felt like they were still staring at each other, across time and rain. As the police van pulled away, and the crowd scattered, Zara stood motionless. She didn't understand why, but something inside her whispered, "This is not the end. This is how stories begin." Before the storm and the arrest, before her silent gaze found his, Zara lived in the hum of struggle. Her mother, Salma, once a school teacher, now scrubbed stairwells in the city's towers she used to dream of working in. Their apartment was barely a room, cracked walls, a single window, and a leaky faucet that sang through the nights. Zara would sit by the door every evening, her teddy bear on her lap, waiting for her mother to come home with aching hands and a tired smile. "Did you eat, love?" Salma would whisper, kissing her forehead before sitting with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 100 invisible defeats. Zara never answered. She hadn't spoken since her father disappeared. Not a word in 2 years. Just wide, watching eyes. And in those eyes, Salma saw all her failures staring back at her, silent and solemn. Every morning, Salma took 2 buses across the city to clean offices she would never sit in. One building always stood out, Rahman Tower. 40 floors of glass and steel, home to power and secrets. She never imagined the man who owned it would someday be part of her daughter's fate. But back then, he was just a name on a badge she wiped with care. She'd stare at his photo and think, he probably never even sees these walls. On floor 17 she paused longest, because from its window she could glimpse the park where Zara used to play. That memory hurt the most. Before the silence. Before the loss. Just laughter and sunlight. Now, every surface she scrubbed was penance for a future she couldn't give. And yet, she endured. Because Zara was watching. Always watching. Zara's silence wasn't just from grief. It was her rebellion. Her way of holding on to something no one else could understand. When her father vanished, he left no note. Just empty drawers and debt collectors at the door. Salma cried for nights. Zara didn't. She just stopped speaking. And though her teachers begged and counselors tried, Zara resisted. Words felt dishonest. So she watched. She learned to read the world with her eyes. The way her mother's shoulders slumped lower each day. The way people looked away from them in stores. The way hunger gnawed quietly, like a patient wolf. One day, she saw her mother selling their old blender on the sidewalk. "For rent," Salma whispered to the buyer, her voice cracking. Zara didn't cry. But that night, she held her teddy bear tighter. It was the only thing that still belonged to her. There were days when Salma considered giving Zara away. Not because she didn't love her, but because she feared she couldn't keep her alive. The thought crushed her. But hunger is cruel, and hopelessness crueler. Once, she stood outside a social worker's door, papers in hand, heart in pieces. But then she heard Zara's tiny footsteps behind her. No words. Just a gentle hand holding hers. In that fragile grip was a message stronger than speech. We stay together. Salma dropped the papers, knelt, and sobbed into her daughter's arms. They had nothing. But they had each other. And somehow, that had to be enough. Zara never smiled. But that night, she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder for the first time in months. It was a beginning, quiet, trembling and unspoken. The last thing they sold was the wedding ring. Salma had hidden it deep in a tea tin, hoping never to touch it. But when the landlord came knocking, angry and loud, she knew hope wasn't currency. She didn't let Zara see. Or so she thought. But that night, Zara quietly drew a picture in charcoal on the peeling wall. 2 hands, one slipping a ring onto the other. No faces. Just hands. Salma saw it when she woke and wept softly, covering her mouth to stay silent. Her daughter had no voice, yet spoke louder than anyone else. From that day forward, Salma stopped praying for miracles. She started preparing. For what, she didn't know. But she'd heard the whispers in the tower hallways. Of empires, of men like Omar Rahman, of chances that only came once. And she promised herself, when that moment came, she would not miss it. Salma applied for the opening at Rahman Industries without hope, only desperation. A temp position. Office runner, nothing more. She borrowed a blazer 2 sizes too big, covered her calloused hands with lotion, and rehearsed her words in the mirror. "I'm dependable. Fast. I can read and write." But when the elevator doors opened, and she stepped into the marble lobby, her heart pounded. She didn't belong here, glass ceilings literally above her, shoes squeaking on floors too polished for her presence. Still, she walked forward. She had no backup plan. At the front desk, the woman barely looked up. Positions filled. Salma whispered, "Please." The receptionist paused, eyes scanning her, then shrugged. Wait. Hours passed. No one came. But Salma stayed, Zara's drawing folded in her pocket like armor. And finally, a door opened. The woman who emerged wasn't dressed in power. No suit. No badge. Just tired eyes and a clipboard. "You waited?" she asked. Salma nodded. 4 hours. The woman studied her. "I need someone who doesn't break when things go wrong." Salma said, "Things break. I don't." That was it. She was hired. Not for skill. Not for experience. But for something harder to teach: resilience. Her job was chaos. Coffee spills, lost files, irate clients. The office devoured people like her. But Salma never complained. She missed Zara's school plays, skipped meals, worked overtime without overtime pay. Each night, she limped home and found Zara asleep, sketchbook clutched tight. Her body broke. Her voice cracked. But her will sharpened. She wasn't chasing wealth. She was chasing survival. And maybe, for the first time, a future. Zara saw less of her mother but more of her strength. Every night Salma brought back not toys or stories, but lessons. People will underestimate you. Let them. Then prove them wrong. Zara still didn't speak, but she listened. She drew. Scenes of her mother surrounded by towers. Scenes of hands lifting weight. Each sketch was a silent vow. I see you. On weekends, Salma taught herself to type, to write business emails, to organize calendars. She sat on the floor with a second-hand laptop and an online course she barely understood. But she tried. Zara watched her fumble through spreadsheets, silently passing her water when her mother forgot to eat. Together, they built a rhythm, not easy, not kind, but forward-moving. And in those still nights, a dream began to form. One not built on escape, but on fight. Salma's efforts didn't go unnoticed. One day, a senior analyst collapsed during a meeting, and she stepped in. Not with authority, but with calm. She gathered, scattered files, corrected the agenda sequence, and prepped the digital board before anyone else moved. The director watched. Later he asked, "Who told you to do that?" Salma replied, "No one had to." He nodded slowly. "What's your name?" For the first time she said it with confidence. Days later, she was moved from floor duty to assistant coordinator. It paid just a little more. But what mattered was the door it opened. She no longer just cleaned conference rooms, she entered them. She still wore old shoes. Still brought instant noodles for lunch. But now when she walked through Ramen Tower, she didn't shrink. She belonged. If only barely. But with growth came sacrifice. Zara grew quieter. Drawings turned darker, towering shadows, empty chairs, long roads. Salma began to miss the cues. Her eyes blurred from late nights. One evening, she forgot to pick Zara up from school. When she arrived, frantic and ashamed, Zara was sitting alone on the steps, holding a sign she'd drawn, "Mom." No words. Just bold letters scrawled in charcoal. Salma dropped to her knees, holding her tightly, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But in Zara's silence, there was no judgment, only sadness. Salma wept that night, not from guilt, but from the fear she was becoming exactly who she promised not to be. Too busy surviving to notice what she was losing. Yet, the next morning, she went to work. Because sometimes being strong means breaking, and continuing anyway. It was supposed to be just another late night. Salma was organizing presentation folders for an executive board review. But something felt off. The files she was handed didn't match the talking points she'd typed the night before. The numbers were skewed. The charts fabricated. She blinked twice, double-checked formulas, and still, it didn't add up. She stayed late, long after everyone left, combing through months of documents. And there it was, a trail of edits, all approved under one name, Omar Rahman. Her breath caught. These weren't mistakes. They were lies. Carefully shaped, polished, protected. She sat back, heart racing. The empire she now served was built on fiction. And if she saw this, others could too. Or maybe they already did, and stayed quiet. Salma had climbed to a place she never thought reachable. But now, she was staring into the fault line that could bring it all down. The next morning, Salma brought her findings to a senior director. She expected disbelief. Instead, she got silence. He read the printouts, then slowly placed them on his desk. "You don't know what you're looking at," he said. "You want to protect your job. Burn these." She stared at him. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying it's bigger than you. Bigger than me." His tone wasn't cruel, just resigned. Salma realized then, the rot had roots. People knew. And they were protecting something. Or someone. When she walked out, hands shaking, the building felt colder. The elevators groaned like they carried secrets. The glass no longer gleamed, it stared back. She could pretend she didn't see. Or she could speak. But either way, there would be no safety. Only consequences. Salma couldn't sleep. Zara lay curled beside her, breathing slow and peaceful. But Salma stared at the ceiling, heart pounding like war drums. Her mind ran through every outcome: termination, eviction, blacklisting. But the image that haunted her most wasn't punishment. It was Zara, drawing shadows again. Her daughter deserved better. Not survival soaked in silence. Truth. Though. That's what she owed her. At dawn, Salma typed an anonymous email. She attached the documents. Clicked send. Unwall. Her finger trembled. It was done. She walked Zara to school that morning like any other day, smiling harder than usual. As they hugged goodbye, she whispered, "You're the reason I'm brave." She didn't look back. Because sometimes, the most dangerous moment isn't the fall. It's the decision to jump. The story broke 3 days later. Rahman Empire under investigation. The headlines screamed. Anonymous whistleblower exposes decades of financial fraud. Omar Rahman denied everything. He stood at the podium, calm and polished. "We are cooperating fully," he said. "These allegations are baseless." But behind the curtain, chaos reigned. Staff quit. Board members disappeared. Investors panicked. Salma watched from a distance, invisible again. But the damage was done. She had pulled a thread, and the seams began to unravel. She expected guilt, regret. Instead, she felt clarity. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It was a beginning. And somewhere inside that collapse, she glimpsed something rare: integrity. Hard-won. I'd won. Costly. But hers. Salma returned to the office a week later, expecting to be fired. Instead, she was called to the top floor. A space she'd never seen. Omar Rahman stood alone in his glass-walled office. No guards. No lawyers. Just a man, weathered and silent. "You sent it," he said. Salma nodded. "Why?" She met his gaze. "Because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world that tells the truth." He didn't respond. Just looked away. "I built everything to keep my family safe," he said. "And I still lost them." For a moment, they stood there, two people who had nothing left to hide. Then he did the unexpected. He handed her a folder. "This is yours now, if you want it." Inside, a job offer. Not in the shadows, but in strategy. Salma didn't smile. She simply asked, "Does this come with honesty?" Omar answered, "It has to." Salma stepped into the boardroom, not as a cleaner, not as a whisper in the background, but as a voice that had to be heard. The emergency summit was underway. Half the board wanted Omar gone. The other half feared collapse. She wasn't supposed to be there. Yet, her name was on the agenda. Interim ethics and strategic advisor, the chair announced. Gasps dead on. Confusion. She spoke anyway. You built towers without foundations. You built them on silence. If you want them to stand, we need to rebuild from the truth up. One man scoffed. Another leaned forward. And what do you know of power? Salma answered, only that it's meaningless if it forgets who it serves. Omar watched from the corner. He said nothing. He didn't have to. This was her moment now. And the vote that followed would either destroy his legacy or start hers. The votes came in, one by one. Hands raised. Voices tight. Power was shifting, not with anger, but with clarity. Salma didn't flinch. She knew the cost. She'd risked everything, to be honest, even if it meant returning to nothing. But when the final vote tipped in favor of her proposal, to restructure, to investigate, to repair, the room fell into a stunned silence. Salma looked across the table at Omar. He met her eyes with something between pain and pride. You just dismantled everything I built, he said quietly. Salma replied, then help me build something better. No applause followed. No celebration. Just the gravity of a decision that changed the air itself. What came next would not be easy. But for the first time, it would be real. Zara didn't know what her mother had done. But she felt the shift. Salma came home lighter, not with money, not with gifts, but with presence. She smiled without force. She sat without exhaustion. That evening, they drew together. 2 pencils, 2 pages, 1 quiet bond. Zara sketched a mountain. Her mother sketched a staircase. No words exchanged, yet everything was said. Later, Salma whispered, you helped me climb. Zara didn't answer. But she placed her sketch beside her mother's, aligning the top of the mountain with the final step of the staircase. It wasn't art. It was a map. A silent acknowledgement that every choice, every cost, was worth it. Because at the summit of it all, they had each other. Omar Rahman stood alone in the same boardroom where he once ruled without question. The city's skyline stretched behind him, vast and indifferent. A folder sat open on the table, his resignation. The board had asked him to stay in an honorary role. He declined. Legacy isn't built by staying in the room, he murmured to himself. As he walked out, he passed Salma's office, no longer a cubicle. He paused. Inside, she worked quietly, sleeves rolled, charts spread out, eyes sharp. He knocked. She looked up. Leaving? He nodded. You'll do more with this place than I ever could. She stood. And not alone. For the first time, they shook hands, not as employer and employee, but as 2 survivors of their own choices. And as equals. That night, as fireworks bloomed over the city, some holiday no one remembered, Zara stood by the window watching colors explode across glass towers. Salma sat beside her, hand resting gently on Zara's shoulder. Do you know what today was? She asked. Zara shook her head. The day something ended, Salma said. And something better began. Zara reached up and pointed, not at the fireworks, but at the tallest building downtown. That one, she whispered. Salma smiled, tears in her eyes. Maybe someday. It wasn't about power. Or titles. It was about promise. And for the first time Zara spoke, not in whispers or drawings, but with a voice clear and whole. Then let's build it. Salma didn't respond. She just held her daughter closer as the lights danced in their reflection. Ramen Industries didn't crumble. It didn't soar either. It transformed. Slowly. Unsteadily. The headlines faded. The gossip died. But inside the building, something new took root, accountability. Transparency. And in the center of it stood Salma. Not a symbol. Not a savior. Just a woman who knew how to build things that wouldn't break. She started a program to hire overlooked talent, single parents, immigrants, people who once stood in hallways like she did, waiting for a chance. Some resisted, but most followed. Because leadership built on truth is quieter, but stronger. And while her office had windows now, she still brought Zara's drawings to every meeting. She never wanted to forget what it cost to sit here, or who she sat for. Zara blossomed in silence, and then in voice. Her drawings grew brighter, sunrises, staircases, buildings full of light. One day, she asked to speak in front of her class. Salma nearly dropped her tea. When the day came, Salma sat at the back of the room, heart in her throat. Zara walked to the front, holding up a picture she'd drawn. "This is my mom," she said. "She fixes things, even big things." The class clapped. Salma didn't cry. She sat still, stunned by the grace of it. Because for all the battles she'd fought, for every system she'd broken through, this was the only victory that mattered. Her daughter wasn't afraid anymore. Her daughter believed again. And that meant maybe, just maybe, she had too. Omar Rahman disappeared from public life. Some said he moved abroad. Others claimed he was writing a memoir. But the truth was simpler. He stepped back to make space. On rare occasions he'd walk through the old neighborhood, unnoticed in his plain clothes. One rainy afternoon, he passed a mural on a side street. It showed a woman holding up a cracked tower, her arms bruised but steady, a child on her shoulders. He stopped and stared. He knew that image. He knew who inspired it. He smiled faintly, then pulled his hood up and kept walking. He didn't need his name carved into the world. Not anymore. Some legacies are not written in gold, but in the quiet strength of those who carry them forward. Salma began teaching part-time, ethics, leadership, grit. Not in classrooms but in community centers, shelters and night schools. She told stories, not theories. She showed people her resume, not degrees, but moments of survival. "There's no blueprint for truth," she'd say. "Only choices." People listened. Because she didn't preach from above, she spoke from the middle. The place most of them lived. She became a different kind of leader. One who didn't promise rescue, but reminded others of their own power. And after every session she'd walk home with Zara. Not fast. Not rushed. Just together. Talking. Planning. Dreaming. As if finally, the future wasn't something to fear, but to shape. Years later, Zara sat in a conference room. Not as a child in the corner, but as a rising architect, pitching her first project. She spoke clearly, confidently, her mother's voice echoing faintly in her tone. The design, a community hub, open to all, inspired by a single drawing from long ago. 2 hands exchanging a ring. "It's about promise," she said. "About what we build when we choose each other over power." In the back, Salma watched, older now, but still sharp-eyed. And when the applause came, she didn't clap first. She simply whispered, "You made it." Zara turned, nodded, and smiled. "No," she said. "We did." It wasn't just a building. It was everything they had endured, survived, and created, etched into steel and light. It began like any other morning. Sunlight spilled across Salma's apartment, steam rose from the kettle, and Zara sat reviewing blueprints with quiet focus. But beneath that routine beat a truth-hard one. This life was not handed to them. It was carved out of sacrifice. The cracks had not vanished, they'd become the lines through which light entered. As Salma dressed for a speaking engagement, Zara looked up. "You nervous?" she asked. Salma smiled. "Always. That means you still care," Zara replied. In that small exchange, generations of silence, struggle, and fear collapsed. Now there was room. For honesty, for ambition, for joy. Salma picked up her old wedding ring, now worn on a chain. She kissed it once. Not in mourning, but in gratitude. Not everything lost had stayed gone. Outside the auditorium, a line had formed, students, workers, parents, all waiting to hear from a woman who once scrubbed hallways here. Inside, Salma stood backstage, eyes closed, hands steadying her breath. The whispers of doubt still surfaced, but now she knew how to speak over them. A technician gestured. "You're on." She walked toward the light. Zara waited in the wings, watching. Her mother wasn't just giving a lecture. She was lighting a path. And as Salma took the stage, applause rose like a wave, not for fame, but for what she represented. A life remade without shortcuts. A power born not from position, but from purpose. She stepped to the podium and began. "I used to think survival was enough, but survival is just the beginning." Across town, an old man stood quietly in a public library. Omar Rahman, now weathered and quiet, browsed the ethics and philosophy section. No security. No entourage. Just a man with time finally listening. He pulled out a thin book titled Built on Truth, From Towers to Ground. He smiled faintly. No name on the cover, but he recognized the voice in every page. He checked it out, walked to a bench outside, and read. Nearby, a group of teens laughed, unaware of who sat beside them. Omar didn't care. His days of commanding attention were over. What mattered now was something simpler, redemption without spotlight. He turned a page and whispered to no one, "She built something better." And for once he meant every word. Zara stood in front of her finished project, a gleaming community hub made of glass, steel, and heart. Children played inside. Elders shared stories in the courtyard. It was designed for connection, for dignity, for people like her. Salma joined her, marveling not at the structure, but at what it symbolized. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's ours," Zara replied. They didn't speak of the past, not today. Because the present was enough. Behind them a plaque read, "To those who carried us when we couldn't walk. This is yours." They stood hand in hand, not looking back, but forward. This wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something generational. Something rooted deeper than glass or stone. Something built, finally, on truth. As night fell, fireworks returned to the sky, another celebration in a city forever moving. Inside her quiet apartment, Salma watched them from the same window where years ago, she held Zara and whispered promises. Now Zara stood beside her, taller, stronger and smiling. A beat of silence passed. Then, Zara placed a small sketchbook on the table. The last page showed two women, standing back to back, holding up a tower. One with gray in her hair. The other, barefoot no more. Salma stared at it. Tears welled. Zara whispered, "You left the company. But you never left me." Salma didn't speak. She simply reached out and held her daughter's hand. Outside, the sky thundered with color. But inside was peace.